Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. With Israel's electoral train chugging along its stations from polling booth to president's residence to parliamentary negotiations, the play is now in Benjamin Netanyahu's half-court. His ability to traverse the obstacles along the way to forming a new coalition government will determine how soon he will head back to the Prime Minister's residence, which he vacated less than 18 months ago, and at what price. To comment on the state of political play in Israel, with no guarantee that these will be indeed the final results, joining us all the way from elsewhere here in the city is Mr. Mitchell Barak, who's the CEO of Kevoon Research Group. Thank you for joining us, sir.
Thank you.
Also joining us from Central Israel is retired Colonel Dr. Eran Lerman, who is the co-host of TV7 Middle East Review, Powers in Play co-panelist, Vice President of the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security, and the Editor-in-Chief of the Jerusalem Strategic Tribune, among many other things. Welcome again, Dr. Lerman.
Thank you.
And with me in the studio is our TV7 Editor-at-Large, host of Watchmen Talk, Powers in Play, and so much more, Mr. Amir. Oren, Amir, give us a broader understanding of the current process that we are expected to undergo here in Jerusalem particularly, but also in Israel at large.
So there are absolutes and relatives here. It is absolutely true that the bloc headed by Netanyahu won the elections. It has a majority in the Knesset, and if negotiations succeed, they will have a government. Now, during the campaign, Netanyahu's main pledge was to form what he called a strong, stable, right-wing government. Right-wing it will be if one considers the religious and Haredi Orthodox parties, the partners, at least, of the right wing. They do not object to right-wing policies. There was a time when they were more moderate.
Not economically speaking, of course.
No, but we're talking about national security and foreign policy. So right-wing it will be. Strong too, in the, at least, if one means national, activist, little or no concessions, yes, that is also going to be true. Whether it will be stable right now depends mostly on the wishes of Netanyahu's biggest partner, and that is the religious Zionism or Zionist religious party, headed by two partners who are also rivals of each other, Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir. And mostly it has to do with what's in Ben-Gvir's mind. Just to sum it up, Ben-Gvir has to choose between immediate gratification, where he gets a portfolio and a seat in the inner security cabinet. He gets legitimacy. He is going to be Mr. Minister, a stunning rise in politics. A year and a half ago, he wasn't even a member of Knesset, and here he is an important ruling member. And this is instant. Against that, he is probably weighing what happens if he submits unacceptable demands and conditions in order for Netanyahu not to be able to form a government, because he has other demands and conditions from other coalition partners as well as from his own Likud members. And if I can combine these two opposite alternatives, I will come up with a third one as a compromise. Yes, go into the cabinet now, be Minister Ben-Gvir, but within a few months either cause the government to fall or push Netanyahu to fire him because of some provocation, and then try to bring about early elections.
I think that's a little too sophisticated for him at this stage, at least in my perspective, taking into account, of course, the fact that he is if he is going to maneuver against Netanyahu. Netanyahu has outmaneuvered pretty much every politician currently serving in the state of Israel.
But he's dependent on him. Right now, Ben Gvir
Indeed.
controls more members of Knesset than Netanyahu's winning edge.
Indeed, and therefore I'd like to ask Dr. Lerman, before the election took place, currently already 2 weeks ago in Israel, we saw the president of the state of Israel, Mr. Yitzhak Herzog, travel to the United States. He met there with his American counterpart, of course, Joe Biden, with National Security Advisor to State Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Sullivan. But during that time, reportedly, a few details have been leaked in which he was informed that the Biden administration would not work with a Ben Gvir if he is to attain a certain ministerial portfolio. This, of course, is not unprecedented. Ariel Sharon, who after Sabra and Shatila was shunned by the U.S. State Department for 18 years, of course, then became prime minister, and the Americans had no choice. But ultimately, when you look at the big picture, it seems like Netanyahu is forced to provide a problematic individual. And the reason I'm saying problematic, because he was 46 times indicted, 8 times charged on matters of support for terrorist organizations, incitement to violence, and so on and so forth, and countless cases. Is Netanyahu able to deal with an international community under such heavy scrutiny at a time when in his own coalition he has members that are already outright going to challenge Israel's international standing?
Well, the American position is just part of a larger picture. By the way, Herzog also participated in the COP conference summit, global summit in Sharm el-Sheikh, met there with a good number of regional leaders, including King Abdullah II of Jordan, for whom also the possibility that Ben Gvir would claim the internal security portfolio, in other words, the ultimate political command of the Israeli police, is highly troubling, because it is the Israeli police, for example, that sustains the actual stamp of Israeli sovereignty over the Temple Mount. No other Israeli authority works there or is tolerated there in the very delicate relationship that we have with the local institutions, the Waqf, and with the Jordanians, who have a standing under Article 9 of the peace treaty. So whichever way you look at it, Netanyahu, if he has to concede this position that Ben Gvir very much wants, will have to basically prove to the Americans on one hand and to some of our neighbors on the other that he retains ultimate control over the most controversial issues, the one that could set fire to the region, so to speak, and that the energies of Ben Gvir, probably in line with the reasons why he rose so dramatically in the polls, in the vote, will be channeled towards returning governability to areas of Israel like the south and parts of and other parts of the country where lawlessness, the use of the almost daily use of weapons in gang warfare and so on and so forth, much but not all of it among the Arab minority. That energies would be directed in that there. Now, the American administration may face a delicate issue. Relations with the Israeli police are professional and quite well established. I can imagine that they will sustain a dialogue with the police commissioner, which in Israel is the equivalent of a lieutenant general, Kobi Shabtai, who runs the police force. without engaging with his minister, if that is the possible compromise. But all of this would put Netanyahu in a very delicate position, and he's already indicating that he will resist the pressure of all his partners to bind him in very specific language, not only to portfolios, that has to happen, but also to very extended guidelines for the various ministries and what is called the basic document, the formative document of the government. He's resisting pressure to be pinned down because he wants to retain his freedom of action, given the prospective pressure from the international community.
Indeed. Mr. Barak, I'd like to hear your point on this as well. But as a professional pollster these days and a former advisor to Prime Minister Netanyahu, the designate at this stage, do you see the reaction of a public which up until these days, up until the elections, they had a interior minister or a interior security minister, who has extensive experience both militarily and in other forms of national security, a defense minister who was chief of staff with a deputy defense minister who was a major general himself and in different capacities. And now they are replaced with a group of individuals who has little to none experience in any security on an executive level. And they are proclaimed to be the saviors of Israeli deterrence and the capacity to reassert the rule of law in areas where lawlessness is being dealt with. I mean, just as last year, there were more terrorists killed, neutralized, I think it was at 187, than the preceding 10 years when we're talking about specific targeted killings and operations. There were more than 3,000 suspected terror operatives apprehended, unprecedented figures, and then this is being utilized against the current defense establishment, so to speak. Give us a little bit of sense into this whole ordeal.
Well, I moved to Israel 30 years ago from a small country called the United States of America, which has the largest and most powerful army. And there's a secret that most of the secretaries of defense of the United States of America, except for the current one, and have no defense experience. They've never been in the army. They've never been generals. And they then take over the Pentagon. And they do just fine. And we've had some defense ministers here, like Moshe Aaron's, like Shimon Peres, that also haven't been in the army. I think that, putting someone who was the former chief of staff as as defense minister is not such a great policy, because they come in with both their knowledge, but their attitudes and relationships. And maybe they want to settle some scores with some people that they didn't like on the way up, or they want to promote some people they do like. And I'm not convinced that they can come into the position fresh and say, listen to the information and make decisions, because they have 30 years of experience there. So we Israelis like to see someone that's experienced, someone that's been there, certainly in the defense ministry, also from a public opinion point of view, in the public security ministry. Although in the public security ministry, we have not had, it's not always been someone with military or police experience. So Israelis like to see that, but it's not clear that, that person will perform better. And I think when it comes to both Ben Gvir and Smotrich, who both ran on this, hard line, we're going to take care of the Arabs campaign, similar to when Lieberman ran a few years ago saying if he was defense minister, he'll take care of the Hamas within 48 hours, and he didn't. They have to realize that if they ran on, we're going to make Israel safer and stop the terror, and they get the ministries which actually do that, and they're not successful, it's going to be very, very difficult for them to face their own electorate the next time because they got so many seats this time from people that thought that they could save the process. So I think we'll see that when they will tone down their requests, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, to say, hey, which ministry can I take that I can actually achieve? Now, if I can go back to the point of, what you were speaking about before, that the United States has said they don't want to work with Ben-Gvir and so forth, and you brought up Ariel Sharon. So when Ariel Sharon was elected prime minister, if you remember, in 2001, I believe, there was great concern among the Americans that this really right of center, and you'll remember his going up to the Temple Mount was sort of the start of his comeback. And becoming prime minister, there was great concern, and I personally was the communications person on a trip to Washington before he even took office, in the few weeks that he was forming the government, with the late Moshe Aarons, with Dori Gold, with Zalman Shoval, where they actually met with the White House, with Dick Cheney at the time, with other administration officials in the Senate, in the Congress, and the Jewish community, to kind of calm them down and say Ariel Sharon is going to be a prime minister for everyone, and he's really going to do the right thing. And not only was he one of the most popular prime ministers in Israeli history, but he had a fantastic relationship with George Bush, and as President George Bush. So I think we could be surprised. And again, what happens in elections like Las Vegas stays in Israeli elections, and Ben-Gvir and Smotrich will both have to sober up, because Ben-Gvir has made a successful career out of going to television studios and saying outlandish and divisive things. It helped him get elected, but it's not going to help him get reelected. So what is he going to do now
Indeed.
that is going to do that?
I think, to be fair, though, if I remember correctly, Smotrich was an assistant to the commander of the strategic planning division in the IDF.
Smotrich was an assistant?
So
you mean an office assistant?
I don't know exactly in what capacity, but he was there.
Smotrich was a very junior, non-commissioned officer or a private soldier for a few months. He wasn't an assistant to any planning authority. No.
Okay, go ahead.
He was Minister of Transport, and quite an effective one. This was
correct.
He did not have mostly political undertones to his job. Of course, some of the settlers want more in the way of roads and other transport demands, but usually, if you talk to people in the transportation industry in Israel, they were quite pleased with the performance during his short term in office. But this does not mean a lot regarding portfolios such as defense or internal security. But let me offer an alternative, and yes, it's speculative, but an alternative theory to what Mitchell just gave us. The relationship between the Commissioner General of the Police and the minister there is usually in favor of the Commissioner General, because he is subject to the law, to the so-called police order, which is a relic of the British mandate here, and the minister cannot intervene. Also, if Netanyahu wants to limit Ben-Gvir's ability to operate, as Eran said on Temple Mount, he can appoint a ministerial committee which will give policy guideline and hold the minister accountable. However, when Mitchell recalled Ariel Sharon, what is common to Sharon in 2001 and Netanyahu in 2022 is their age, 73. Most of their career is or was behind them, while Ben-Gvir looks ahead, and for him, it is better to try and fail and blame Netanyahu for tying his hands. He will not say, okay, this is the reality, I cannot do this and that. He said, no, I promise, this is my campaign pledge, I am serious, I'm sincere, I want to do it, but Bibi doesn't allow me. So I'm leaving his government, and I want to have more power the next time around. So their interests collide. Of course, everyone wants a piece of the pie. They are hungry for power. Either they were never there or they want to go back. But they are also looking towards the next elections so that people like Mitchell Barak can make a living.
Indeed. Well, just to
and
correct
our
myself,
and our living too.
Smotrich was in the operations division. I've just noted. The question is, in what capacity? Of course, he was very junior at the time, but as you noted, indeed, he was quite successful in the transportation ministry. And when we're talking about Netanyahu with regard to the defense portfolio, Netanyahu never provided the significant portfolios to anyone, not in his party and not to his partners, which was, of course, also the strategic split, I would like to call it, of the foreign ministry into this ministry for strategy, which then took the portfolio of the United States particularly, and we had all kind of shifts in order to maintain the reins of power on his corner of the arena. Dr. Lerman, I'd like to ask you, to what degree are we to expect to see a certain trimmed portfolio granted to the various people that are to partake with him in the coalition, and to what degree are they willing to go along with such a reality, considering the fact that this is pretty much the methodology that has been taking place over the course of his consecutive governments?
Well, I think the most important change that I've heard being raised as a possibility, one which could revolutionize the way the Israeli government actually works, is not in the field of foreign affairs and is not in the fields of security. It's not even in the very controversial, very dramatic field of the reform in the legal system, which many people in the right are pushing very hard for, and Netanyahu is somewhat resisting, knowing that this would create a deep breach with the let's say a very large segment of Israeli society. Where he may revolutionize the way business is done is by emulating the American model and moving the budget function from the Treasury, from the Ministry of Finance, to the Prime Minister's office. In the same way as in the United States, the Treasury collects money, but it is the OMB, the Office of Management and Budget in the White House, that suggests to Congress, Congress makes the decisions, but suggests to Congress what the US budget should be allocated for. And therefore, this is an immensely powerful function in the government. And if he manages to offer a trimmed Ministry of Finance to one of his key partners, either Smotrich if he has to, or Aryeh Deri, who is his, I think, most closest and most balanced and experienced ally in this government, then the Prime Minister's position in Israel will be stronger than it has ever been.
Indeed. Mr. Barak?
Yeah, I mean, look, I worked in the finance ministry for two finance ministers, and for Adon Meridor and the late Yaakov Ne'aman. It's not as glamorous as it seems to be, because you're giving out budgets, but to be a good finance minister, you really have to cut the budgets. And there's a lot of politics there, because you have to convince the ministers to actually cut the budget. So you want to put someone there who's got very, very good political skills, and who all of the other ministers want to work with. So, that could be someone in the Likud party that Netanyahu in the past has given to, or it could be someone in, like Deri, that he trusts and who's really a political operator and knows how to do it. The problem with Aryeh Deri there is that he not only is he a convicted felon for financial crimes and sat in prison, but he's recently reconvicted on some tax evasion charge. So what does it say about a country who puts someone as the finance minister who evaded taxes and then had some kind of plea deal, and just like a year or two later is now serving as the finance minister? I think it'll be interesting to see what happens with the other ministries. Certainly Netanyahu likes to give away the really good ones, like the foreign ministry and like the defense ministry, to someone who's not in the Likud, because being in those positions is seeing as capable as a kind of warm-up to be prime minister or to run for prime minister. So he certainly doesn't want to, select an heir apparent, and he certainly doesn't want to put himself in a position that people inside his party can revolt and can actually do something or try and take over his position. So if he does give it to a Likud person or either of those ministries, it's going to be given to someone who he thinks is not the best candidate for the job, but who's most loyal to him and who's going to do a mediocre job so that he can still control it.
Indeed. Well, we're drawing...
Of course, he could alternatively do what Ben-Gurion, since he has already had the job for longer than David Ben-Gurion and thinks of himself in the same category as our founding father, he may decide to do what Ben-Gurion did all his life as prime minister and serve simultaneously also as Minister of Defense. That certainly positions him as the ultimate arbiter of Israeli affairs.
Indeed. Well, there's a little over 1 minute left, Mr. Oren.
Well, first of all, I don't see the problem that Mitchell just raised with Derry being a convicted tax evader. It takes one to know one, and the best police officers have criminal minds. So this would be an advantage rather than a disadvantage. Netanyahu's main aim is to get out of his legal troubles. Whatever helps him, do it, he will. The other stuff, governance, policy, that could wait.
Well, time will tell about that, of course. But even though he keeps insisting that it's not the case, obviously.
So we have to believe him.
Within a democratic society, until proven otherwise, indeed. This is all the time that we have for today. I'd like to thank Dr. Eran Lerman, Mr. Mitchell Barak, and Mr. Amir Oren for being part of today's panel. And I'd like to thank our viewers as well, and we will see you next time. For more of TV7's productions and editorials, we invite you to visit our website at www.tv7israelnews.com.